Mr. President, let me begin by commending my colleagues, Senator Mikulski, Senator Harkin, Senator Alexander, and Senator Burr for their hard work to reauthorize the Child Care Development Block Grant. This is a modest piece of legislation, and I urge my colleagues to support it. But the main point that I would like to make this morning briefly is that even if this modest piece of legislation passes, it will not begin to address the very serious problems that we face in child care in our country, and even more importantly, in childhood poverty. Mr. President, the United States is the wealthiest nation in the history of the world. Unfortunately, despite our great wealth, we have the most unequal distribution of wealth and income of any major country on earth. We have more people today living in poverty than any time in the history of our country. Most significantly, and related to the discussion we're having about child care today, the United States of America has, by far, the highest rate of childhood poverty of any major country on earth. In my opinion, we have a moral responsibility to address that issue, and we should put our energy and our minds on focusing on how we eliminate childhood poverty in America. I will be offering an amendment today, which is a very, very simple amendment. And what that amendment says is that the President of the United States should submit a plan to Congress which substantially reduces childhood poverty over the next 5 years. That's the amendment, that the President of the United States submits a plan to Congress which substantially reduces childhood poverty over the next 5 years. I would hope and expect that we would have unanimous support for that amendment. Mr. President, as you will recall, not too long ago, during the Winter Olympics at Sochi, Americans who were there were shouting out to our great athletes, USA, USA, we're number one. And that was something I think that many of us in America supported. We wanted our athletes in the Winter Olympics to be number one. But, Mr. President, while we want to be number one in terms of our athletic prowess, while we want to be number one in terms of our scientific and intellectual accomplishments, while we want to be number one in terms of economic growth and prosperity, we surely do not want to be number one in the world in terms of childhood poverty. And that is where we are today, with almost 22% of our kids living in poverty. And the reason, quite obviously, that we do not want to be number one in the world in terms of childhood poverty is not only the moral issue of turning our backs on millions and millions of our most vulnerable people, kids who are 6 months old, kids who are 2 years old, kids who are 8 years old, human beings who cannot fend for themselves. It would seem to me, as a caring people, that we have the moral responsibility to make sure that all of our children receive the basic necessities of life and not live in poverty. So I think there is a moral obligation to make sure that we eliminate childhood poverty, but there is also an economic reality as well. And I'm going to get to that in a minute, but the first point to be made is that when we look at childhood poverty in America, which is 21.8%, we should examine what's going on in other countries. Is it possible to go forward and significantly reduce or eliminate childhood poverty? And the answer is yes. All we have to do is look around the world. In Denmark, child poverty is 3.7%. In Finland, 3.9%. In Norway, 5.1%. In Iceland, 7.1%. Austria, 8.2%. Sweden, 8.2%. Germany, 9.1%. In South Korea, 9.4%. United Kingdom, 9.8%. France, 11%. New Zealand, 13%. Poland, 13.6%. Canada, 14%. But in the United States of America, the childhood poverty rate is 21.8%. Mr. President, as I mentioned a moment ago, this is clearly a moral issue. A powerful nation, a nation which in recent years has seen a huge increases in the number of millionaires and billionaires that we have, should not be a society in which almost 1 out of 4 of our kids get their nutrition from food stamps. We should not be a society where a significant number of young people are dropping out of high school, standing out on street corners, and destroying their lives. But it is not just a moral issue, it is an economic issue. You tell me what kind of economic future we have when we are competing against countries around the world which are doing a better job than we are in providing the intellectual and emotional support their kids need, that are doing a better job than we are in educating their young people. How do we compete against these countries in the international, very competitive global economy? Do we say to the young children who are living in poverty, sorry, we can't afford to provide the preschool education you need, we can't afford to provide the child care that your parents need, and we're really sorry that the odds are that many of you may drop out of school and that some of you will end up in jail. We have more people in jail in the United States of America than any other country on earth. And clearly one of the reasons for that has to do with the fact that we have the highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world. You pay for these things one way or you pay for them the other. And the way that we are paying for it is by spending $50,000 or $60,000 a year incarcerating huge numbers of people rather than making sure that our kids get the nourishment, intellectual, emotional, nutritional, that they need in order to do well in life. Mr. President, it is important for us to look at what happens around the world, to see what we can learn, to see what is working well around the world. And it is important for us to learn and to understand that in countries like Denmark, Finland, and Norway, where childhood poverty is very, very low, child care is free to all of its workers. Workers in these countries get paid maternity leave. That means when a mom has a baby, she has the opportunity to stay home with her baby during the most important months of a baby's life and not have to worry about going to work and making a living, because those societies have said the right thing, that they want kids and mothers to bond and fathers to bond well, for those kids to do well. In this country, if you're low income or working class and you have a baby, you got to get to work right away, because if you don't have that income, how do you take care of your families? Those countries have done the right thing, and it's important that we learn from them. Mr. President, in many countries around the world, workers get allowances from their governments to take care of their children. Their workers are guaranteed a 4-week paid vacation. Health care is a right and not a privilege for their citizens. In France, for example, if both parents go back to work after having a child, they are entitled to receive strong child care benefits. In Germany, hard for us to believe, but if children get sick, their parents get up to 25 days of paid leave to stay home and take care of those children. These are just a few of the many, many benefits that people in other countries, our competitors, receive. Maybe we can learn something from that. Unfortunately, Mr. President, workers in our country, in this great nation, have none of those benefits. And here is what has happened as a result. More than 1 in 5 children in America live in households that lack consistent access to adequate food because their parents don't make enough money. In other words, number of millionaires and billionaires are growing, more and more income and wealth inequality, and millions of families today who are raising kids are wondering how they're going to have enough food on the table to provide basic nutrition to those kids. Should that be happening in the United States of America? Mr. President, the number of homeless children living in America has gone up by 73% since 2006 in every state in the country, in my state of Vermont. There are families living with their kids in cars or in emergency shelters. Is that the way we give kids the opportunity they need to advance in their lives? Mr. President, what the psychologists tell us over and over again, that the most important years of a human being's life in terms of intellectual and emotional growth, of those years between 0 and 4. And yet in this country today, less than half of 3- and 4-year-olds are enrolled in preschool. 96% of infants and toddlers living in low-income families don't receive the early education they need through the Early Head Start program. More than 220,000 American children are currently on waiting lists for child care assistance. And on it goes. What does this mean in English? This is what it means. It means in Vermont, it means in New Jersey, it means in Maryland, it means in states all over this country. A mom and dad wake up in the morning with a 3-year-old, and they are worried about the quality and affordability of the child care they can find for that kid. So they go to work, and they're saying, what is happening to my kid? I've got to go to work, can't stay home with my child, we need to make money, and yet I cannot find quality, affordable child care for my child. And in this country, that is exactly what we should be providing. Mr. President, according to a recent study by the Children's Defense Fund, childhood poverty costs this nation at least $500 billion each and every year in extra education, health, and criminal justice expenses, and in lost productivity. In other words, rather than learning what other countries are doing, investing in our kids, nurturing our kids, making sure our kids get the great education they deserve, we turn our backs on millions of kids, and then we're shocked, just shocked, that they turn to drugs or crime or self-destructive activity, and we spend a fortune incarcerating them. Think about all of the intellectual and emotional destruction that takes place in this country because we ignore the needs of our children. Mr. President, when we hear our fellow senators come to the floor and talk about how the United States is the greatest country on earth, I share that sentiment. But I do not believe that the greatest country on earth should have, by far, the highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world. Mr. President, the amendment that I have offered is a very, very simple amendment. I would hope that it is accepted. I hope that it would be supported unanimously. And I hope that it will allow us to go forward. And what the amendment says, again, is very, very simple. It says that the President of the United States should submit a plan to the Congress which allows us to substantially reduce childhood poverty in the next 5 years. That's it. So with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor. Hope very much that this amendment is passed. Thank you.